Assalamu alaikum everyone. Hi there. You know, if you're a Muslim like me, chances are you have heard one of these following accusations against our beloved Prophet. He was a warlord. He married a 9-year-old girl. He was a womanizer. He had 11 wives, etc., etc. Now, if you're someone who have grown up reading about the life of the Prophet, your reaction will probably either be this, or this. Look, I get it. Okay, you're angry, and I would be too if I was in your position. But being angry and cursing at them won't solve anything. What you need to do is give them an intelligent answer and to their arguments so that it shuts them up for good. Now, one of the main purposes of this type of accusation, in my opinion, is to get an angry reaction out of people. If it's a non-Muslim, the purpose is to brainwash them into hating Islam. If they don't hate Islam, the purpose then is to shut them up so they can't help the Muslim minority, even if they desperately need it. If they do, they will probably be called a snowflake or libtard or etc., etc. If it's a Muslim, the purpose is to make them leave Islam, so they can use you as a new full of hate ex-Muslim to join the cause. Or if you don't leave Islam, the purpose is to make you angry, so the hatred between the Muslim and the non-Muslim continue to grow. So how do you stop this? I mean, it's actually quite simple. If you realize and analyze the accusation that they usually throw at our beloved Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam, you'll realize that the logic behind these hateful accusations or arguments are actually quite weak, and sometimes it's so weak that it's downright stupid. I mean, what do I mean by that? Well, I've created 10 chain of arguments that I believe debunks most of their claims. Now, I may update these arguments in the future, but for now, I believe they are enough to show just how stupid and childish these accusations are against our beloved Prophet. So, argument number 1, a genetic fallacy. Now, this is a common argument that you will hear from critics of Islam against Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. First, they will say that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was a bad person because of reasons X, Y, Z. Then their argument will follow, and then they will say that because he was a bad person, therefore he was a false prophet. Then the argument will follow, and then they'll say because he was a false prophet, therefore Islam is a false religion. Now, there are two things here. A, first of all, Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was not a bad person. He was one of the greatest human beings that ever lived, and I will make a different video proving that why he is the one of the greatest human beings that ever lived. And B, even if you do believe that Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam was somehow a bad person, it still doesn't prove that Islam is a false religion. Now, the problem with these accusations that they throw at us, throw at our beloved Prophet, whether they're true or not, is that it is a classic genetic fallacy. I mean, if you don't know what a genetic fallacy is, let me explain. A genetic fallacy is committed when someone dismisses a claim based on where or whom it comes from. For example, Richard Dawkins is an atheist who wrote The God Delusion. So he is bound to want to disprove religion. Therefore, the arguments he made in the God Delusions should be rejected and cannot be taken seriously. Now, the thing is that it is true that Richard Dawkins is an atheist. However, that has nothing to do with the arguments he made in the God delusion. The arguments has to be examined based on its own merit. Same way, the arguments that Prophet Muhammad made regarding Islam or Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala has nothing to do with the history of the Prophet. So the arguments that he made about the existence of God or Islam or the fact that he was a prophet has nothing to do with his history. So the arguments has to be examined based on its own merit. Therefore, saying or trying to prove that the Prophet was a bad person does not prove that Islam is false. Number 2, it's a fallacy of inconsistency. Another known problem with this type of accusation is that the ones making the claim oftentimes contradict themselves or commit the fallacy of inconsistency. For example, in order to prove that the Prophet was a bad person, they would often quote the hadith from Bukhari or Muslim. For example, take the hadith about Aisha radiallahu anha being married to the Prophet at the age of 9. Where did they get that from? Well, Bukhari. So here they're trusting the source of the hadith or the hadith as a valid source of information, which means they are trusting the information that is in the hadith and the method which they were collected by. Yet, when we show them that Prophet Muhammad split the moon in half from the exact same hadith, all of a sudden they will be like, oh no, it's a myth, despite the fact that both of these hadith were collected using the same method. So which one is it? Is the hadith a reliable source of information or is it a myth? I mean, if you don't believe that the hadith is a valid source of information, why are you using it as an evidence? This begs the question. If you don't believe that the hadith is a valid source of information, why are you using it as evidence? I mean, you can just say that only the things that we agree with in the hadith are true, and things that we don't agree with in the hadith, like for example the moon being split in half, are false. You're contradicting yourself and thus committing the fallacy of inconsistency. So like I said, the question has to be asked. I mean, if you don't believe that the hadith is a valid source of information, then why are you then using it in some cases? And if you do believe that the hadith is a valid source of information, then by default you have to believe all of it because they were all collected using the same method. If you do believe all of it, then you can use it as evidence, not otherwise. You can't just cherry pick and say, oh, the ones we agree with are true and the ones we don't agree with are false, when the hadith reports were all collected using the same method. It's a contradiction and it's a fallacy of inconsistency. Objections. Now, some of you may object and say that, well, isn't this a fallacy of composition? By the way, in case you don't know what a fallacy of composition is, let me explain. A fallacy of composition is committed when someone says that if something is true in some part of it, then it's true for the whole of it. And the reason why my argument is not a fallacy of composition is that I know very well about this fallacy, which is why I was very careful in my wording, which is why I didn't say that because one hadith from Sahih al-Bukhari is authentic, therefore all of the hadith in Sahih Bukhari is authentic. That's not what I said. Or the whole collection of Sahih Bukhari is authentic because of that. That's not what I said. I said that because both hadith were verified and classified as Sahih by the same scholar using the same method, therefore when I say that if you accept one hadith as a valid source of information, then there's no way you can reject the other hadith because they were both collected and graded as Sahih by Imam al-Bukhari. Let me show you guys a good example of this. Apostate Prophet made a video, I think it was one of his earliest videos, where he made a video about Aisha radiallahu anhu's marriage with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam. And the funny thing is that in that video he used Sahih Bukhari as an example or as a source of information.
The hadiths about Aisha's age are accepted by the vast majority of Islamic scholars, and Muslims have been believing the same things for 1400 years now. They are just as authentic as the same hadiths that tell the Muslims how to pray 5 times a day. They share the same source, but many don't even know that. Also, the name of the hadith books gives it away. I use mostly Sahih Bukhari and Sahih Muslim translations. The word Sahih means authentic, and that's where
And the funny thing is that in his other video, where he talked about the splitting moon, the moon being split in half, all of a sudden he uses this same Sahih Bukhari and yet says that this is a myth.
people look at the hadith. Anyway, according to the hadith, the moon was split in 2 in Muhammad's time. But if you believe in Islam, claims that some unimportant people in the desert make are enough as evidence.
I mean, like, what? You know, I mean, like, why is it a myth? Why is it all of a sudden a myth? I mean, the information that's coming from Sahih Bukhari, because he didn't have any problem believing Sahih Bukhari when he was talking about Aisha radiallahu anha's age. Yet, when it comes to the moon being split in half, all of a sudden it's a myth. I mean, like, what gives? Also, according to SPG Code of Ethics, which is the Society of Professional Journalists, according to their code of ethics, Apostate Prophet broke the 6th code, where it basically says that to identify sources clearly, the public is entitled to as much information as possible to judge the reliability and motivations of the sources. He completely ignored this, or completely broke this ethical code. Basically, he did not identify the sources clearly, because in one video he is using it as a valid source of information when he's trying to prove that Aisha radiallahu anhu, her marriage with Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam happened at a young age. And at the same time, he is contradicting himself and saying that this same source is not acceptable when he's talking about the moon being split in half. And by source, I mean obviously Imam al-Bukhari and the method he used to collect the source, Imam al-Bukhari's work. And so he's breaking this code of ethics. If you can't abide by these simple ethical codes, then why should people trust you? So as you can see, this is what we call, you know, we educated and people with common sense, we call this hypocrisy. And people like this in a world that's not messed up would be called a hypocrite. And you'll see many examples of this. I mean, like Islamophobes, they love to do this. They always use hadith whenever it suits them, but completely rejects it whenever it doesn't suit them. So yeah, in a normal world, we would call these people hypocrites and liars. But the world is so messed up right now, especially in Western countries, that they actually think that these hypocrites and liars are a valid source of information. Yet when actual Islamic scholars give them information, they don't want to take it. So this is the kind of hypocrisy you'll see. And yeah, so yeah, stay away from this kind of people who uses this kind of hypocritical double standard when it comes to judging Islamic literature, Islamic text like hadith or the Quran. Stay away from them, and stay away from Apostate Prophet. And another thing is that I wanted to mention. This is the first episode of a new series called Debunking Ad Hominem against Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. And let me know what you guys think of the first episode. The second episode will probably be coming soon, inshallah. There will probably be 5 episodes. This is the first one, and inshallah after I'm done, you will notice that the arguments that I've used can be used to debunk almost all of the ad hominem attacks against Prophet Muhammad Sallallahu Alaihi Wasallam. I mean, there's nothing that they can come up with that probably won't fit into this category. But if there is somehow some argument that they make that doesn't fit in this category, let me know. I am willing to update the chain of arguments, so it would help me. And so yeah. So with that, I'll end this video. Thank you for watching. Thanks a lot. I know a lot of new subscribers have subscribed to the channel. Welcome. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh. And inshallah, hopefully you will stay with me as I debunk this kind of nonsense that's being thrown around on the YouTube community, and as I debunk these ex-Muslims and Islamophobes. So yeah, thank you for staying with me, and hopefully I'll see you guys in the next video. Jazakallahu khairan. Assalamu alaikum warahmatullahi wabarakatuh.